For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth Rumack. I am the founder and executive director of education at Ruth Rumack's Learning Space. We have been in operation, oh my goodness, like almost a quarter of a century now. I find that hard to believe. And really our focus is working with students one-on-one and in very small groups. We have made the switch over the last year to be online, as most places are right now. And it's really quite amazing that that pivot that we had to make has actually turned out to be a really wonderful opportunity for us to share our resources and share our learning and teaching styles, but also be able to reach more students so they don't have to live in the area or be able to commute into Toronto. We can now see students from all over the world, and we practice that direct instruction pedagogy, research-based programs, hands-on, multimodal, multisensory. We like to get the kids up and moving, even in a virtual space. So we can talk more about what we do later. My guest today, you'll see her on the screen, is Jennifer Makwana. And Jennifer is our Director of Educational Operations. She has been with us for, oh my goodness, I'm gonna make, is it 12 years, 13? What is it? Yeah, I think so. Going on 13. And we are so lucky to have her with us tonight because not only is she an amazing educator, but she is also a parent of a child with exceptionalities and has been through this process herself. So you will get to hear her story, and she's going to share her insight both as an educational professional and as a mom. And I'm really glad that she's with us tonight. So thanks, Jen, for being around.
Sure.
All right, we are going to talk about a whole bunch of things, and let's get on to it. We're going to move on to the next slide so we can get started. So we've got categories here. These are the categories of exceptionalities. And when I look at all of these, I'm just going to move some things on my screen so I can see better. There are many things that are regarded as an exceptionality. We can look at the behavioral exceptionalities, communicational exceptionalities, and those are the things that include the learning disability. So our purple column is really quite large, and it includes autism spectrum disorder, as well as many other things, and the language processing, visual spatial processing, visual motor processing, all of those pieces of learning disabilities that would come up through a psycho-ed. So when your child is labeled with a communicational exceptionality, it encompasses all of those pieces. We also look at intellectual exceptionalities, both on all sides of the spectrum, so on the gifted side, as well as the mild intellectual disability or developmental disability end of things. We look at neurological and physical exceptionalities, and then we get to this other, the blue column, which is the attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. And that, of course, has 3 subtypes. But the interesting thing about ADHD all by itself is that it is not considered a learning disability in Ontario, but will often coexist with other learning disabilities or challenges. And so when we look at this spectrum of exceptionalities, we have to also think there's another category, which is the multiple exceptionality, which means that a child may have something from column A and something from column B, and they are then looked at as an entire whole. And the process within the education system has to take into account all of those various pieces. Let's look at the next slide. The thing that is frustrating for many parents is that if your child is only diagnosed with ADHD without any other pieces of an exceptionality, then it is difficult to get support for that in that way. So I'm going to explain a little bit further. When we look at ADHD, this is just an overview of what it is, and we know it's a neurobiological disorder, and it has significant impacts for school success, can have significant impact. And we also know that in every classroom, there are going to be 1 or 2 kids who are diagnosed with ADHD. It is also the most common disorder that coexists with learning disabilities, but it is not considered a learning disability on its own. And that becomes problematic if it's the only exceptionality that a child has for getting support within the school, because it's not listed as a disability. Let's move on to the next slide. So when we look at education we have the school boards. You know, in Toronto, we have the Toronto District School Board, Catholic School Board, we've got Peel, Durham, all of the different regions within Ontario. And then we also have private schools. And the boards and the private schools each deal with special education in a different way. So the interesting thing about the private schools is that they each have their own system. So if you are looking to get into a private school because you think a smaller classroom, more personal situation would be better for your child, you also have to look at what supports do they actually have in place already and what would be best for your child. So we have to look at the school fit. And what does the school stand for? Is it a highly academic program with some support, or even a particular special school for special education students that zeroes in on that and uses very particular research-based programs? So there are a lot of choices in the private school system. However, you have to really look at what will they offer my child and what resources will I have available to me as a parent as well. The one thing that we want to really stress is that private schools are not required to implement the IPRC process or to develop or implement IEPs. Now, I'm using lots of acronyms, and I want to make sure that I define them before we go along. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the IEP, which is something we're going to refer to a lot tonight, is the Individual Education Plan, and the IPRC is the Identification, Placement, and Review Committee. So two separate things, and we're going to talk in depth about those in a little bit. The other thing we might use is an LD, which stands for Learning Disability officially, although I like to think about more of a learning difference as opposed to a disability. And what other, I think there are a couple of other ones, but we'll talk about them as they come up. All right, let's look at the next slide.
I think that's me.
That's you, Jen. Go for it.
Okay, well, hello everybody. Thank you for being here. My job tonight is to take you through the different steps in the process. And this particular process is how it happens in the TDSB. Although the Catholic Board in Toronto follows basically the same model, a little bit of the terminology is different, but basically it's the same model. I would expect that most other boards follow a somewhat similar model, but of course we can't cover every school board in Ontario. There are many. So as Ruth mentioned, I've worked with her for about 13 years now, and in that time I've had the opportunity to work with so many students with so many unique special education needs. And I've really learned a whole lot about how to support those students both in the classroom and out of the classroom. And I've had the opportunity to participate in IEP meetings and SST meetings, which we'll talk about, and all kinds of things. And also advise on, recommendations for IEPs and things like that, because what we do at Ruth Rumax is, really get to know a student's individual learning needs. And, we often have great tips and ideas on how that student might take, the stuff that we're doing with them and transfer it into a classroom. In that time, I also have become a parent. And I have two kids, both in the TDSB, and they both have very unique needs from each other. So my daughter is in grade 4, and last year she was designated gifted. So we kind of went through the process here. We did a school support team meeting, and we kind of stopped short there. We decided not to go through to the IPRC with her, and instead elected to put her in extended French. So we didn't go all the way. A gifted program kind of takes you all the way down here to the special education realm, but she's very happy doing the French, and that's really what she wanted. My son is in grade 1 this year, and he is really where the bulk of my experience comes from. So I have learned a ton about navigating the system through my experiences advocating for him and his pretty significant needs. So I plan to share my experiences with him as we talk about the different stages in this process. But just to give you a little bit of a history, so you have the context, we kind of plopped right into here, the school support team meeting 3 weeks into his JK year. So he didn't get off to a great start. He had a lot of trouble managing his emotions, outbursts, running out of class, throwing, hitting, all of it. And, you know, we knew some of this was coming. He had seen an OT while he was in preschool, and we knew that he had some self-regulation challenges and some sensory behaviors. And I think one of the best things that I did for his advocacy was that I contacted the school even before he started. So the June before he was to start JK, I booked a meeting, and I laid it out and I said, this is what we are seeing in him. These are the reports from the OT, the occupational therapist, and I kind of gave them an idea of what they can expect. I really didn't exactly know what was coming because, he went from a nice small little preschool to 30 kids in a JK SK room, and that's a whole new ballgame. But I think it helped so much because they knew, right? They knew that we were trying. They knew that it was more than just behavior. And, as soon as they started to see those things, I think, they were able to reach out to me and say, like, yes, we're seeing these things. And that's why I think we got that meeting, that SST meeting, so early in the school year, because they were already aware of challenges that were happening for him. And really, I mean, that's why you're all here tonight, right? You've all started this process, and I'm sure you've hit some walls along the way, as did I, believe me. But you recognized that, your child has some needs, and you're here to learn more about how to help them. And I think the best advice I can give you tonight is keep looking for things to try, keep pushing, keep asking, because it is a process. It's a long process, and it can be a very difficult process, but it's worth it. So I kind of consider myself a bit of a TDSB success story, because with my son, we made it all the way through to here. He's now in a partial integration ISP class, an intensive support program, and he's really, really getting like the amazing support that he really, really needs. So I want to share with you tonight some of the things that I did to get to that great place. But back to Zach for a second. The behaviors in JK continued even after these school support team meetings, and we had many. And then in January of that year, we finally did receive a diagnosis of autism. So the day that I received that diagnosis, I emailed the principal and requested an IPRC meeting. So did I get an IPRC meeting right away? No. In fact, I was sort of referred back to here, and like, we're gonna like do some more meetings, and you've missed the meeting for this month, but we'll get you in next month. And there was definitely some persistence on my part involved. There were persistent emails about, concerning incidents that were happening in the school. There was increasing requests for better support for him. At one point they tried to tell me that he could come to school for 30 minutes a day, and that was it. And I said, that's not really going to help him. So there was a lot of pushing and a lot of like just, following up and asking. And, I finally did get that meeting. And then from that meeting, I made sure to push for the IPRC. And, from there, he was offered a spot in a special kindergarten program for SK, a program which they've now canceled, unfortunately. It was a great program for kids with self-regulation and behavior issues. Unfortunately, it was cut, which is kind of, the way things have been going lately. But from there, he was offered a spot in grade 1 in an autism intensive support program, and that's where he is now. I also just want to say that I think one of the main reasons why we ended up with the supports that we did is because his behaviors were very visible. And I recognize that for many of your children, they may not have very visible behaviors, and they may be, struggling very silently. And that's really tough because they don't get seen, and they don't necessarily get the kind of attention that they deserve, because they're just kind of sitting quietly in class and not really making noise and making that attention that they need to get the support. But I think in addition to that, I think that my persistence and my understanding of the system and knowledge of how everything worked really helped push us along. And I think also my very helpful nature. And by that, I mean, I was always, asking, what more can I do? What else can we try? Like, let's do this, let's do that. And that kind of persistence, I think, and patience definitely helped move us along this path. All right, so by the way, this path that we see on the screen here is from the TDSB Special Education Plan. So Joelle is going to put a link in the chat for all of you, because I know that was one of the questions that we received in advance, is where to find this plan. It's a really big PDF. It's about 135 pages long, but it's full of really great information about how this process works. So I recommend clicking on that and saving that. All right, so we're going to discuss each of these steps in a little bit more detail. But basically what you can expect here is, in this first part, somebody notices that something's going on, right? It might be the parents who request support right away, like I did, or it might be that the teacher notices something's going on and starts doing, assessments and screens and things like that. From there, the school meets and talks about what kind of support they can do to, strategies they can try to help turn things around. And if those don't work, you move into this third one, the school support team. From there, it can move into an IEP, or you can also, or you can move into an IPRC. And then from the IPRC, that is where you are offered different kinds of special education. So to get down here, the special education class, you do need to go through an IPRC. One thing that's a bit misleading, I think, about this flow chart, though, is you do not need to pass an IPRC or have an IPRC to get up here to the regular class and to have support within the classroom. You can bypass an IPRC, and that often is what happens, is, the school is going to try things that aren't quite as, or that are maybe, let's say, that are more inclusive before they move into the special education thing. So you'll often bypass an IPRC, but you'll get an IEP, and then you'll get support within the classroom, but it might be minimal support. And sometimes you can get that support while you're waiting for your IPRC to happen. Also, I should mention that along the way, you can initiate any of this as well, right? So you can request an IEP, you can request an IPRC, although you do need to have the proper documentation for that. So you need to have like a diagnosis and some kind of documentation to support that diagnosis in order for them to consider your child as an exceptional student, which is really what the identification part of the IPRC is. It can be a little bit of a slow process. There's a lot of waiting involved. There's wait times for psych eds. There's also time that you need to give strategies, right? There's a lot of strategies and ideas that are going to be thrown out in these two meetings, and you need time to try those and implement them in a classroom and see if they work. So there is some patience involved, I'd say, as well, because you need to, give it a chance and see if it's working. And if that doesn't work, try something else. You don't necessarily just get to kind of skip right to this. One of the questions that we received in advance that I want to address now is, if my child needs psychoeducational testing, does the school board provide it? So the answer to that is yes, but it's quite hard to get. It's different from board to board, but it is mostly reserved for the most extreme needs. And there's a wait list. So, we've heard stories of parents waiting up to 3 years to get a psych ed done through the school board, which is really unfortunate because obviously, you don't have 3 years to wait for your child to get, special education support. So The other option, if you have the means, is to get a private psychoeducational evaluation. That's typically the only way that you can really ensure that you'll get one in a timely manner. Unfortunately, COVID has put a little bit of a wrench in that as well, because there was a short time where psychologists were shut down back last spring. And there's been a bit of a catch up. They are working now. They're doing psych ed reports or assessments in person. They're allowed to operate. And so they're working their way through it, but you know, psychologists are busier than they ever have been at this time. So if it's something that you want to pursue, now's the time to start looking and calling around and finding out where to go, because it's, from what I've heard from different psychologists that we know, they're very, very busy. All right. So stage one, if you're here today, you've likely made it to stage one, or at least. And this is where the teacher is, you know, doing their screening, different assessments, running records. They're really gathering information, and they're just trying to find out more about what's happening for that student. They'll likely have contacted you as well. So your role is to share your concerns. Maybe you've already done it, or maybe, you know, you're waiting for the teacher to contact you, and then you're going to share what you've seen and what what you've noticed as well. Now's a good time to start brainstorming the strengths and the needs of your child, and also to suggest strategies. So if you've worked with any outside supports, get them involved, find out what they recommend for your child in the classroom. But also, you know your child too, right? At this point, with my son, when he was in JK, I was trying all kinds of things. I was making visual schedules for him, posters for the bathroom to help with his sensory challenges. I brought in sensory toys. I basically made a calming corner in the kindergarten room. There was a digital clock for his transitions that we tried. I had a communication book to track his behaviors. I was just throwing out all kinds of ideas and emailing with the classroom teacher and meeting with her. And a lot of the things I tried to cater to his interests. So his visual schedule looked like a subway map, because he was really into subway maps. And the more that you can capitalize on what your child is interested in, the better success you may have with those things, because it's something that they're actually going to respond to. The next stage is called the in-school support team. And in the Catholic board, this is called the school-based support team. So this is a meeting that the school has. So you may not even find out that this meeting has happened, and unless you've already been in contact with the classroom teacher, in which case you probably would find out about it. That's another reason why I recommend being the person to broach the subject first, and make them aware of the challenges that you've already noticed. So they're going to come up with strategies and action plans to try in the classroom. They're also going to start an individual learning profile for your child, where the teacher tracks the different assessments that they've done, the different strategies that they've tried. Your role here, part of this meeting, is really just to maintain the communication, those open lines of communication that you've already established. All right. Moving on to stage 3. So this is called the school support team in the TDSB, and in the Catholic board, it's called the school-based student learning team. So this is the first official meeting that you will be invited to, and it includes everyone from that IST, so the teacher, the CERT, which stands for Special Education Resource Teacher, and the principal. And they will also invite professional supports to this meeting. So you'll see sometimes a psychologist, a social worker, a speech and language pathologist. The special needs consultant from the board is usually in attendance. And what they're going to do in this meeting is they're going to evaluate the plans or strategies that are currently in place, talk possibly about more strategies that they can try. This meeting sometimes leads to the development of an IEP, or sometimes referral for other kinds of supports. So school boards offer, albeit it's minimal, but they offer, OTs support and speech and language support. When my son was in JK, I think he saw an OT through the school for 30 minutes about 3 times. So it's pretty minimal, the kind of support that you get from that, but every little bit counts, right? And that the OT was great. She offered suggestions for the classroom teacher after she saw him, and they really work in conjunction with each other and as a team to provide strategies and try different things. This meeting can also be the meeting that leads to the IPRC. So let's talk about your role at the SST meeting, because this is where you get involved, right? This is where you're invited. So your role is to attend. It's to take notes. From my own experience, I can tell you that it always feels rushed. You really only have 20 minutes. And it's a fast, hard 20 minutes. They will push you right out that door. Like, they will wrap things up because, these things happen during teacher prep time or before the start of the school day. And there really isn't time to have a lengthy discussion. So you're going to feel like there's just this barrage of info coming at you. And I always left feeling a little bit shell-shocked in the first few, because it's just very overwhelming. So here's how we can help. We have some tips. So firstly, I would say just know what to expect. It's the same format every single time. You'll go around the table with introductions. You're given a copy of that individual learning profile that the teacher's been filling out. And the teacher will read from that the list of strengths and challenges for your child. Then you get a chance to speak, and then there's time for a short discussion, next steps, and that's it. So here are some other tips to kind of keep things moving along in the meeting. Have a binder. This is my binder. I made this binder after Zach was diagnosed, and it has tabs for all the different things that I need for him, right? It's got his OT reports, it's got my meeting notes, it has all the copies of his IEPs, it has the assessment, the diagnosis information, the diagnosis letter, all of that. What's really helpful about that is I had extra copies of everything. So if somebody was like, oh, where's that IoT report? And they're flipping through, I would just be like, here it is. And that can really help save some time, because everybody has access to all of the information right there. So being organized and being prepared is a really great thing. The other thing I would say is make sure you use that time to ask for what you think should happen. So if there isn't an IEP in place yet and you need one, or you think you should have one, that's the time to ask for it. A safety plan. In my son's case, amazingly, he didn't have one for quite a long time into the school year. And there were some really dangerous situations that he was running out of the classroom and fighting with kids on the staircase and things like that. And I really felt strongly that he needed a safety plan in place. And I had to keep insisting numerous times until I got it. So this is the time to speak up. And when you have the ear of all the people there, right? Sometimes you only have the ear of the principal or the classroom teacher. So when you have all of those ears in a room, that's the time to really ask for what you need. And then finally, when you're taking notes in this meeting, use a template. So we have one for you here, and there's actually one in your handouts, but I'm gonna just show it to you here. This is what I use. So you circle the type of meeting that it is. You can list who's present if you want. I think that's really helpful to just help you remember what professional supports were available. Make your own list of strengths and challenges, especially if you've noticed anything new that's come up for your child. And then there's spots for your questions. So make sure you have them written down in advance, and then you can see that you have to ask these questions, make sure you get through them, write down your answers. There's a big notes section for further discussion points or strategies that they suggest. And then I would say the very most important thing on this document are the next steps. I left early on, before I started using this, I left many a meeting just like head, in the clouds, wondering like, now what? Like, so much information just got thrown at me and I don't even know what happens next. So make sure you clarify what the next steps are with a timeline. So you want to know how long they plan to try something, and how and when they're going to assess whether it's working. right? And so get that information before you leave that meeting, because that leaves you feeling like, okay, now I know when I can start bugging again or when I have to follow up. But it's really important to not just kind of leave it open. I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I felt like I made at the beginning. All right, so moving on to stage 4. So this is the IPRC meeting, and the IPRC meeting can be requested by a principal, usually after that SST meeting, or it can be requested by a parent, as I did when that day that we got the diagnosis. So officially, you are supposed to, within 15 days of your written request for an IPRC meeting, this principal is supposed to provide you with a copy of the TDSB Guide to Special Education and a written statement of approximately when that meeting will occur. That wasn't my experience. Like I said, it was about 3 weeks, and then I emailed and said, hey, about that IPRC meeting. And then I kind of got put back on the flow chart and, you know, moved into the next meeting and that kind of thing. But just because, you know, all the documentation that you'll find and in all the TDSB information, it says, you know, you must receive that guide within 15 days. I didn't. You may have to ask. So the meeting is not typically held at the child's school. It's usually at another school or at the board office. They're currently being done online. My last one for my son was online. So that's still happening. The committee is made up of another principal, an official from the board, and a psychologist. And what happens is, you know, the principal will have sent all of your child's assessments and evaluations and everything that's kind of meant for them to look at. You're free to send any pertinent documents as well. So if you have, you know, I had the diagnosis letter from the developmental pediatrician. I had some other reports and things like that. All of those things are considered. Then in the meeting, again, it's, you know, the committee will have previously read through all of these documentations, so they're ready. And then there's another quick review of the child's strengths and needs. They go through what the documentation is. And then very quickly, they decide whether the child meets the qualifications to be identified by the ministry as an exceptional student. And they have to fit under one of those categories that Ruth showed us at the beginning. So it's kind of strange because, you know, it's like they're deciding whether, you know, my child has autism. And I was like, well, I already know he has autism, like the pediatrician told us. But that's just the process, is they, you know, they have to determine it for themselves. After that, they look at, okay, what is the best or most appropriate placement for the student? So this could be in a regular classroom with various forms of resource support, which we'll talk about in a second, or it could be in a special education setting. And again, more on that in a minute. The written decision of the IPRC is really the only guarantee that your child will receive the services that it requires. So the IPRC initiates the mandate that an IPRC must be completed within 30 days of the placement. So that's really your you know, final and solid guarantee that you can get an IEP once you've been through that IPRC system. Of course, you can get an IEP without it, but once you have that IPRC, like, it's just a little bit more official because there's more mandate that the IEP has to be done. If you don't agree with the decision that they make in that committee meeting, you can appeal it. There's a process for that. And I think that's it. Oh, and I don't know if I mentioned, but you do attend that meeting. So you're there, the principal and the classroom teacher is there with you. If your child is over 16 years of age, they are also welcome to attend. Okay, so we had a few questions, advanced questions that we're going to address now that were specific to IPRCs. And after that, we're going to open the floor to more questions, questions that relate to these first 4 stages that we covered. So that assessment, the initial assessment, the in-school team meeting, the school support team meeting, and then the IPRC. So the first question was, what is supposed to happen after the IPRC is put in place? How do you get the support you need? So you're offered a placement. If it's a placement in a special education class, you have to agree to it. They're not going to force you into that, and you're allowed to go and visit it. And then that placement will start the following year. So you don't, your child's not going to join a special education class like in April or something like that. It's going to start in the following September. If they're offered just a regular class placement with different kinds of resource support, that should start rather quickly. You don't have to wait to for the next year for that. So that's definitely something that you want to follow up on afterwards to make sure that those supports have, been initiated. Another question was about how long the designation stays on file. So IPRCs are reviewed every year. You have the option to decline it if you feel like the supports that you have in place are great and you don't want to change anything. But if you're not happy or you're looking for more supports or different kinds of supports, every year towards the end of the school year, there is another IPRC meeting for you to go and say your piece. If you're in a special education program, you have to be in one for 3 months at least before you can request a review IPRC. And that's if you feel like it's not a good fit and you want to maybe explore a different approach. But really the goal is always to move towards inclusion, right? So if you feel like, the school is going to want to sort of slowly take away supports as needed or as necessary, because the idea is the supports are helping, your child achieve their goals and move along, and, less and less supports are required. So if you feel strongly that the supports that are in place are the supports that you need and you want them to continue, make sure that you speak up and explain why and how they're benefiting your child, because you want to make sure that your voice is heard and that those supports, if necessary, will continue. Okay, so this is the end of the flowchart, and I'm going to talk about these different types of support that you can be offered. So firstly, in a regular class, that's when your child stays in a mainstream class with the rest of their peers, and there's 3 different forms of support that they might receive. This indirect support here at the top is really when the classroom teacher is receiving some kind of consultation from the special education teacher or some kind of outside support. In my son's case, there was an autism team that came into the JK classroom and observed him and observed the class, and then they offered some indirect support to the teacher on things that she could change and do differently to support my son. In the regular class resource is when the special education resource teacher, or CERT, comes into the classroom, and she or he might work with your individual child or with a small group of children. Typically what happens is, there's some whole class instruction from the classroom teacher, and then they're breaking off into smaller groups, and the CERT will take one of those groups and do a little bit more focused attention and learning with those children who maybe benefit from more direct support. And then the third type of support that a child might receive who remains in a regular class is called regular class withdrawal. And that is specialized instruction that happens outside of the classroom. It has to be for less than 50% of the day. So typically what this looks like is the child comes out a few times a week for 40-minute period or so, and goes to the resource room and works with the resource teacher on a reading program, like reading recovery, or a lot of schools are using Empower now. Some kind of reading instruction is very typical and for that kind of support. There could be other kinds of things depending on the child's needs that a resource teacher might do with the child as well. If your child is given a placement in a special education class, that can look like 2 different things. So partial integration is where they're in a special education class for some of the day and in a mainstream class for another part of the day. So typically they would have to be in the special education class for at least 50% of the day. And the homeschool program is part of this partial integration model. In the TDSB, this program is now only grades 6 to 8. It used to be grade 4 to 8. And in fact, it's actually being phased out by 2022-23. So the way that it works, it's 50% of the day, typically the morning, and it's a focus of language and math with the resource teacher with a small group of kids. They spend the morning working on those skills. Kids in the homeschool program are typically working a couple grades below grade level. And so that program has been really beneficial to those kids because it's quite hard to keep up with the curriculum, even when it's modified in a regular class, if you're that far behind. So they work in the homeschool class for the morning, and then they go to their regular class in the afternoon for their other subjects. And then the full self-contained class are typically the intensive support programs or ISP programs. So that's what my son is in. He's in an autism one, although his program is actually a partial integration ISP. So he hasn't actually had the integration part, but that's mostly because of COVID. You know, they're keeping them in their cohorts. So he's really just been in a contained class this year when he's been there. So they have different ISPs for autism, for LDs, for mild intellectual disability, for developmental delays. The gifted program is considered an ISP, and also behavior, among some other ones as well. So these options are only available through IPRC, as I said at the beginning. You can't get to these without having gone through the process of being identified through the ministry. All right, that is it for the elementary support. Ruth is going to take over again to talk a little bit more about the types of support that are offered at the secondary level.
I think though, Jen, before we do, we should just make sure that if there are any other questions, any questions that have come up that we can address before we move on.
I did forget about the questions. Yes, thank you.
You're very, very passionate about what you're talking about. I just want to make sure.
At the beginning, and then, you know, I just like kept plowing right through. Okay, so let's do questions.
So there have been a couple questions. Can you hear me?
Can.
Okay, perfect. So somebody has asked, what is the difference between the regular class withdrawal program and the partial integration program?
Mostly time. So regular class withdrawal, like it says, it can only be up to 50% of the day, and it's very rarely even close to that. Whereas partial integration will be 50% of the day in the special education class, at least, usually more. So the integration, in my experience in the SK program that my son was in, they very slowly would like try integration with like, we're going to join the gym class of the, you know, of the mainstream class for the day, and little things like that, you know, as the kids were ready. So the main difference, I think, is just the amount of time that you get.
Okay, so another question sent by Michelle is, what if they are not determined to have an exceptionality because there is no diagnosis, but rather lagging skills that have not been helped in the class but made worse? There is an IEP.
Right, so then, you know, that's sort of the system where, you know, you have to bypass this IPRC and kind of try to get support within the regular class. So the options available to you then are these three here: the indirect, resource, and withdrawal. And, you know, if things that are being tried are not working, that's when, you know, you might have to, you know, come up with some suggestions of your own, or, you know, work with outside organizations that can come up with more ideas, and, you know, you're kind of the go-between there with passing on information of other things to try within a classroom to see if those things might work.
I would say also that if you are Getting close with your vice principal or the principal may be helpful in that situation as well, because if there is no diagnosis, it's very hard for the school to take it much further than if there is an IEP, getting the IEP to be implemented. So if you are working with an outside agency, that's something that, you know, we do often, is we are the go-between between the school and the parent and the system itself, so that things that we're working on individually with that student can also be put in place in class. And then there's a much wider communication. I like to call it the communication triangle. You've got the home, you've got the school, and you've got outside support. And if we can all communicate together, hopefully we get a little bit more happening. But like I said, being friendly with the teachers and constant communication in terms of reflecting about what's working and what's not. It sounds like you're in a frustrating situation if things are being made worse, but and COVID online learning doesn't help that situation either, I'm sure. But I would say that if there's no diagnosis, there's only so far that the school has to take it, if you know what I mean. Okay, there are a few other things. I'm just going to read them out. Diana, I know, raised her hand. Diana, did you want to be unmuted? You can. Yes, no, I'm not sure. Okay, so if you would like to be unmute, yes, okay, yes. Let's give her an unmute. I think Joelle can do that.
Diana, go ahead.
You're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so our son has autism and ADHD, but he has been receiving accommodations for learning disabilities, learning exceptionalities, since he was in grade 3. He has pretty severe math dyscalculia, anxiety probably as a result of that, and also executive functioning. So complex, and he's had an IEP. So this year, new principal, new issues coming up. Now, we've known that he has ADHD. Somehow the paperwork went missing. And in order to get him the accommodations, and effectively, the accommodations are already being provided. But in order to put ADHD, as he is moving on to high school, they required a brand new IPRC meeting and brand new identifications. So we went back to the pediatrician, wrote a letter that he has ASD and ADHD, no additional accommodations are needed. Then that wasn't good enough. Then we had multiple meetings with a school board. Then this is the York Region District School Board. Then we went to the same psychologist that did the original psych eds, and we had paid her thousands over the years. And she had given a summary stating that he has ADHD, he has ASD, but all accommodations are being provided. We were told that's not good enough. So we were told that she has to state specifically what the accommodations are, basically do summarized IPRC, state what the accommodations that would be necessary, which she had already put in the original report that was done about 5 years ago. And we had to pay for this again. So that was hundreds of dollars because the school board would not pay for it. And with COVID, we were told it would take months, if not by the end of next year. Yeah. And that, excuse me, that would not be suitable because he's starting high school next year. So we went and did that. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that exists that says what is considered sufficient documentation. So the school board that I work at, and I'm a teacher myself and I'm a spec ed teacher, there is nothing that says specifically this must be the type of medical documentation that is provided from an external source. And the interesting part is that the psychologist, the school board psychological consultant that reviewed the report that we provided, she just signed off on it. She said that the psychologist that we have chosen for our son was actually someone that had trained her and taught her. So it was almost a mockery what the school board was doing. It was a mockery, basically saying, go and spend money for this, hundreds and hundreds of dollars for something that is not even needed, because it said at the end, absolutely no changes needed.
So the frustrating part was getting to the end of the grade 8 year, knowing that you're getting to transition into grade 9. You need to have these things in place and to be signed off so that you can have the same support in high school.
And we have to pay for it again.
And you have to pay for it again. I'm sorry that you had to go through that, because it's really a very frustrating situation when you're already full of stress and tension trying to get to the next level.
For sure.
So I think if you're asking, is there documentation that says exactly what needs to be provided?
Yeah.
I think that it is as vague as you have experienced. I don't think that there is something that is 100%, this is all that you need only, or it's a wide range of things. So unfortunately, sometimes it's at the discretion of the people who are signing off the papers. And in my experience, if a parent, we do have the opportunity to appeal a decision, which sounds like you have done.
Which didn't work. Yeah.
Pardon me?
It did not work because it kept coming back to the same thing.
Came back to the same thing. We talk about this a little bit later in terms of the hierarchy of who to talk to and when, and we will get to that in more detail. But, when we look at your school team, then you look at your IPRC team, and then you can look outside of that towards the superintendent or towards the trustee, the education trustee in your area. And then there is even a higher level of an ombudsman who can review cases that are unfair. So if you want to move towards the next level, you've tried your hierarchy, you're working through the hierarchy, probably the next person to talk to would be the superintendent level.
Oh, we did. The superintendent was involved, and before the superintendent had gone on a leave. So that was a superintendent. So this school has had multiple superintendents, multiple principals, which has been a huge factor in the confusion. And so the superintendent left, principal left, and well, it comes back to square one because there's insufficient documentation or tracking.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, and then we're going to move on, but I'd love to continue the conversation at the end of tonight, just so that we make sure we get through the rest of the material. What is the question you're asking? Where do I go from here? What do I do next?
Well, no, because they already agreed with what the psychologist said, simply because the psychologist that we have for our son was actually the one that had worked with and trained the school board psychologist. But it was an unfortunate experience, so we had to pay this much money, and the school board is not willing to reimburse us.
Yeah, that's really hard to sit there and know that you've made this full circle and all of the expenses and the stress that went with it, and you still end up in this, and you get what you want, but you've had to do it in the most circuitous route.
Yeah,
that's really tough. I'm sure you're not the only one that feels that kind of frustration. I'm sure there are a lot of people who are listening today who have felt similar frustrations, for sure. But if you would like to stick around later, I would, be happy to chat further about it. But thank you for sharing that, Diane. I really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
We've got one more question, which is, are there outside programs or experts that can help the student with new strategies or skills that they can take with them to school? I find outside help has been 1,000% better than in the school itself, as the teachers are not equipped to deal with learning disabilities or ADHD. I know you offer an executive functioning program. That is very true. That these are our specialties. We work with students one-on-one. We have a whole host of teachers at all levels, starting from kindergarten through to the end of grade 12. We even work with some university students, especially those transitioning from high school to university. We have a research-based approach. All of our teachers are certified teachers, and we really look at what are the strategies that are going to be helpful for the student. We work with them, we experiment with them, we reflect on them in our sessions, and then we share them with the school. And I can say that when we work as a team, that triangle of home, school, and outside support, when we work as a team, we can get really far. And when the school is open to our strategies and techniques, and we can communicate and be reflecting and changing as we go, we can reach some great success. So yes. Okay, I'm going to do one more question. How do you manage the cooperation between your organization and the school if they are closed, not keen to hear from outside supports? Well, it's always a challenge. I would say that my philosophy is you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And we want to be communicational and not confrontational. I don't know if communicational is even a real word, but it's the word I'm using. And I like to suggest things, and our teachers suggest things in an open, let's give this a try and see kind of way. So we're not sort of shoving our strategies down the throat of the teacher to say, you must do this and this is the only way it's going to work. But I will approach it by saying, you know, we've been trying something in our sessions and I found it really helpful. When I present the information as a, I don't know, let's say in chart form, it seems to be much easier for my student to grasp it than if it's all done in paragraph form, for example. So I'll sort of slide in my suggestion or what's been working for us, and then ask them if they would be open to trying it, or if they could see a place where we could experiment with it to see if it's actually working. So it's more, sometimes a classroom teacher or the school is not willing to participate. They have their own methods and they don't want to mix the two. They're maybe concerned that it's too many cooks and it's going to spoil the broth, but there's language involved. And if we can come at it from an open place ourselves with some suggestions or opportunities to try something as an experiment, I find that that can be really helpful. I hope that that helps you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. You guys have great questions, really great questions. Let's see. So we're going to move on to the special education at the secondary level. And this is what's offered by TDSB. So we have the resource program, which is in the regular classroom setting, and students get the special education resource support from a special education teacher. We also have, I'm going to flip to the other side of the slide, which is the secondary learning strategies. And most schools will refer to that as your GLE credit. Your GLE credit is an actual credit course that has a curriculum that a student who has had an IEP and has been deemed as having a learning challenge or an exceptionality can take this course, which is learning strategies. There is a curriculum that's based with it that's supposed to talk about what is your learning style, what are your strengths, what are your challenges, how do you advocate for yourself, and then also be a resource for that student to use as a homework session or to get extra help. That GLE credit is something that you can earn up to 4 credits within your Ontario secondary school diploma or during your 4 years of high school. But you do have to have an IEP or be referred by the principal. So you're going to get a credit for your GLE if you've been identified. And then I'm going to move back to the middle. So where we have some special course options in the secondary program. The RSE is a non-credit bearing assignment. It's basically an independent study that the school will set up to give students extra support, but it is non-credit bearing. So it may help with reading skills, note-taking skills, or math skills, but it's not going to give you the credit for the course. And then we have something called the optional credit courses or locally developed courses for students who need support to also work through the Ontario curriculum and get the Ontario curriculum credit, but they need it maybe broken down in a different way, or they need to have a modification to the actual curriculum itself. So these are different aspects that we can access at the high school level. And then we have something different altogether, which is the ISPs, which is the smaller classrooms or support at the grade levels to support students with similar special needs. They're placed in this intensive support program. So that would be a very specifically developed curriculum that may not be credit bearing. Okay, let's move on to the next thing. So let's talk a little bit about IEP development. So this is the Individual Education Plan, and this is what the first page looks like. Many of you, if you're already in the process, will be familiar with this document, and it will tell you whether or not a student has been identified as exceptional by the IPRC committee and what the exceptionality is. So it's very clear up at the front. It should set out the goals or the outcomes for the new year or the upcoming year. It should list your accommodations, modifications, or alternative programming. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what an accommodation is versus what a modification is in a moment. But that is clearly laid out. And then where this educational programming will be provided, and then any terminology. The terminology should be clear to teachers, parents, and students. So if you've come across something in your IEP that you don't understand or you're not familiar with, definitely ask a question and clarify what it is that's on there, because it should be written in a way that you understand what it is and you understand what is both required of the classroom teacher and of the school in general. All right, let's look at the next slide. So accommodations. We've got accommodations and we've got modifications. And the accommodations are really the how, the when, and the where of the program delivery. So you see we've got a nice chart. We've got the instructional side of things, which could be an accommodation, would be an adjustment to the teaching strategies to meet that child's needs. So that might be how you give the information, how the teacher shares the information, only giving small pieces of the information at one time, or allowing the child to have a scribe so that they can have somebody write their ideas down, or using assistive technology. Those are all examples of instructional accommodations. So changing how or when or where the program is delivered. When we look at the environmental accommodations, that's a change to the physical environment of the classroom. So sitting up at the front, taking tests in a quiet room, using a fidget or a sensory tool, taking breaks, noise blocking headphones, all of these different things that change the environment to allow the student to be more successful in their educational situation. And then we have the assessment, and that's making adjustments in the assessment, whether it's the activity or the method or the timing. And this is a big one. Often accommodations are easiest to put in place in assessment. So you might get time and a half, or your child might get time and a half, or they might get somebody to read or to write out their answers for them, or to use technology, assistive technology, or to do an oral exam. All of those things can be accommodations. They're not changing, and none of these accommodations will change the what of the curriculum. They're not changing the meat or the expectations of the curriculum, but they're changing the how and the when and the where that the program or the information is delivered. So this is, a lot of people have seen this slide, the accommodations, if you gave everybody the same accommodation, some people still wouldn't be able to have the opportunity to see the baseball game. I always identify with the shortest one because that's me. I'm definitely height challenged, but if you gave me 2 boxes and somebody else got 1 box, we would all be able to see the same game at the same time. So it's a little visual for that. Now I want to talk about modifications, because this is actually changing the what of the curriculum. And when we make changes to the Ontario curriculum, what is expected of that child, or what they're expected to learn, that's going to or could affect the later trajectory in high school and high school credits. So we want to be clear as to why we're making a modification, why we are changing the curriculum. What about that part of the curriculum is that child not able to do on their own or successfully? It could be something like learning different material. We have a picture here of, a full version of Hamlet versus Hamlet for kids. So you're both of them are going to give you the same story, but of course one is going to be at a much different reading level, comprehension level, vocabulary level, and the expectations on that student will be different depending on what they have read or what they're required to learn from it. Some other examples could be being exempt from projects, or answering different test questions or different tests altogether. Could be alternative projects or assignments, but everything is going to be assessed in a different way than the typical curriculum. What's really important about a modification, if your teachers or you are asking for a modification, is that you're very clear about how that modification is going to be used, and the impact that modification in this school grade will have on upcoming school grades. Because when you get to the secondary level, it's definitely going to have an effect on which credits you can get, which courses you're going to be able to take, and whether you actually complete all of the courses that you need to graduate with your diploma. Okay, let's move on. See what else we've got. Sharing a diagnosis. I think this is really important, because I've had many conversations with parents, when they're at the beginning of this process where they've received the psychoeducational evaluation, or they've gone through all the meetings, and now the child's going to be moving schools or moving, having different supports inside the classroom. When things are happening around you as an individual and you don't have control over them, it can be very stressful and it can be very anxiety producing. And for the most part, in most situations, I would recommend to share something. So you may feel strongly that you don't want your child to have a label, but you should explain it in some way that their brain is wired differently. And that is perfectly fine, because everybody has strengths and everybody has challenges. And we want to make sure that that child feels comfortable in their own skin. I remember having a conversation with a student whose parent had kept the diagnosis from them. They didn't want to label their child, but that seemed to escalate the child's anxiety, because there was all of this stuff happening around them and supports being put in place, but they didn't understand why. And when we got to the point, we had a conversation, and the parent did explain part of where they were coming from and the diagnosis that they had. And finally, the child just looked at me and said, "Guess what? I'm not stupid. I'm not lazy. It's just that my brain works in a different way." And it was this giant relief that came over this child. And that understanding of themselves actually allowed them to be more open to the support and to be more open to the accommodations and the things that were, the resources that were available to them. So there are some concerns about labeling, lowered expectations and helplessness and creating more anxiety. But in my experience, when we do give it a name, doesn't have to be a full label, but when we do explain where those challenges are coming from and why things are so difficult for that individual, it really increases self-awareness, and they learn more about themselves and can be proud of their strengths and also recognize their challenges and be able to work towards them with a clear understanding of where they're coming from. And of course, advocacy. So, the more we can get our kids to self-advocate, the better. So share something. You don't have to treat the diagnosis like a secret. I would say use kid-friendly language, emphasize those strengths. You are an amazing artist, athlete. You tell the best stories, or I can't believe how creative you are. All of those things, and really talking about growth mindset, that maybe you're not there yet, but you're going to get there, and we're going to get there together. Let's look at the next slide. I would also say, get some support for yourself. Build a network, build a team of people who understand what you're going through, and that can support you in that. There are lots of Facebook groups and meetup groups and lots of things online where you can join together with other parents who have similar challenges or needs. There are lots of organizations that are available for all of the different exceptionalities. And then there are also educational consultants that can help navigate the system, either as an advocate or to find the best school for the fit of that child. And remember, when you are advocating for your child, for yourself, Jen's binder is like the be all and end all. It's an incredible document that she carries with her. And those organized notes have allowed her to really take advantage of the things around her, because she's got all the information at her fingertips. We said before, building relationships, really, really important. And following that chain of command. And sometimes it can be so frustrating, like Diana was saying. You feel like you're hitting your head against a wall, or you come up against a block. Take a moment, take a deep breath, step back, have a good cry, have a glass of wine, chat with your friends, but take a moment to regather and gather your strength again, and then figure out who is the next person that you need to talk to. Sometimes you can't fight all the battles. You've got to choose the one that's going to be most important, that's going to have the most impact right now, and save the other things for next time or next year. Always, always document your phone calls and your chats. We like to recommend that you send an email after a conversation that outlines in bullet form what you have spoken about, or what the next steps will be, so that everybody's on the same page, and you ask that person to add their side of things if you've missed anything, so that you get that communication and it's in written form as well. And knowing your child's strengths and challenges and being realistic about it, and understanding how far can we push this particular need right now, And again, what is the priority, and how do we let things build organically while supporting our child at the same time? All right, let's look at the next one.
We need to get to questions again. I think there were some IEP questions.
Awesome. Let's do questions.
And yeah, some other questions that you have written down, I think.
Okay, oh yes, thank you for, yeah, see, you're reminding me too. We just get carried away, that's all. I'm going to look at questions. I have a question. What if a modification is not granted, i.e. French, even if the psychoeducational report strongly recommended this exemption due to dyslexia? Oh my goodness, this is such a tough one, and I have had this conversation many, many times, where it has been recommended on the PsychoEd for a child not to take a second language, to be exempt from a second language credit because they have a communication disorder like dyslexia. And it's a tough one. And sometimes, you know, you don't want to put your child through a course that they are not capable of doing. It adds to stress, it lowers self-esteem, it lowers their confidence. I think again, looking at that chain of command, if your principal is not willing to make an accommodation, let's go to the next level and the next level if you have the documentation to prove it. Because learning two languages when a child is struggling to learn their own language that they speak on a regular basis is really challenging. And I think we need to level it up, especially, as I said, if you've got the documentation. I wish I had a better answer for that one.
I have more on that. We had this question in advance, so I did look this up, and
Great.
I did find on the TDSB website, I don't know if you said that you were with TDSB or not, but that the decisions for exemptions from French, there's a whole spiel first about how, like, it's not ideal and we don't like to do it and all of that, but then down at the very bottom, it does say, decisions for exemption should be considered on a case-by-case basis. The child's teacher, the resource teacher, and administrators will provide advice and consultation. Consideration for exemption may be given to, and then there's a whole list of students and particular needs that will be considered on that case-by-case basis for exemption. And it does say students with severe learning or language disabilities that include significant central auditory processing deficits requiring extensive modification and accommodation. So I would keep pushing, and you know, maybe, you know, if the psychologist can put in a phone call or something like that, you know, it's something that they consider on a case-by-case basis. So just make sure that you're a case and that they're going to consider you.
Persistence. I think so. We asked, can you get exemption from an EQAO? I believe it's this, you also have to go through the channels. So, you know, you're going to appeal to your principal first, and then you know, I would probably have it, bring it up at your IPRC meeting. I think that would be the first step.
It will show up on that document that you get from the IPRC about whether an exemption is required or not. It also is on the IEP. So if any kind of meetings that you know, you want to bring that up in, those are the times to ask for those kinds of things.
Great. Okay. I'm going to look at the questions that we have from a few other people. Somebody asked or made a comment that the TDSB has a wait and see or wait for the right age situation in terms of delaying testing and intervention, and can be extremely detrimental to students. What do we suggest for parents if they're not willing to step in with early flagging and early testing? I think you got to take the matter into your own hands, and going privately is the best way to go at this point because of the long wait terms in the boards. The other piece is that, you know, if you do have health insurance, many psychoeducational evaluations are covered by, or portion are covered by health insurance plans. I know that lots of different psychologists will also have sliding scales if the finances are challenged. And we do know that not only are the psychologists, yes, they were backed up and probably still are backed up to some degree, but many psychologists have been able to do their testing virtually. So, or a combination of mostly virtual and then 1 or 2 in-person appointments for some very specific tests. So I know that it can be extremely effective to do a virtual psychoed, and I would encourage you to check our resource page on the website, ruthrumack.com. Under parent resources, we have a whole list of psychologists that we work with on a regular basis. We know some of them are here today. Some people from Cornerstone are here today. So they do excellent evaluations, and because we're in this situation of lockdown, they are still able to provide that service. So I would say take the bull by the horns and get it done privately. It will be well worth it, even at the expense that it is. Somebody says they're on the wait list in Buffalo, a little longer wait because of COVID, but it was not as long a wait and was cheaper. Also still accepted in Canada. Oh, I have never actually heard of anybody going to Buffalo for a psycho ed. Well, good for you. All right. Why not? You know, I think choosing a psychologist is very important to look at the psychologist's personality, but you know, how they interact with your child, and of course the tests that they're going to do, but everything is standard. So shop around certainly and find the person that's the best fit for you and your family. Great. Well, that's a new one. What else? I'm looking at my list here. Okay, we talked about exemption from French. Were there any other questions you wanted to address, Jen?
There were some specific questions about ASD. So some people were asking about services offered for children diagnosed with ASD at TDSB, and also how can I make sure that the school offers my child all relevant supports and resources that would help him thrive. So as I mentioned, there is an autism team in the TDSB. They do in-school visits. They make recommendations to classroom teachers. There's also behavior therapists that work as part of that team. So ask about that. I didn't know anything about that until one day they just said, oh, the autism team is coming in today. So if you know about it, then you can ask about it. So that's a great one. Like I said, referrals to OTs and SLPs. You can ask for resource support. You can, try to get, the IPRC and, get a space in an intensive support program. It's been really, really beneficial to my son. Absolutely. I would also say there are certain IEP goals that you can ask for. So Ruth mentioned, the IEPs have accommodations and modifications. But you also have alternative goals on an IEP. And on my son's IEP, he has goals that work on his transitions, because that's a big one for him. There's a self-regulation goal. There's a social skills goal. He has a fine motor skills goal. So there's lots of different things that are, challenges that a lot of kids with autism experience, that you can have a specific goal on the IEP to help support that. So I would definitely ask about those. I'd also suggest working with the teacher. As I said, I was in very close contact, especially with my son's JK teacher, because we were just, throwing everything against the wall. Now that he's been in these more supportive programs where it's very small class sizes with specialized teachers that, really work with kids with autism, and they also have a child and youth worker in the class, they don't need my support as much. I talk to them still, but I haven't really been offering a lot of suggestions because they already know all of the things, all of the tricks. But if you're not in a program like that, talk about, reward systems and visual schedules and any kinds of things that your teacher can implement, I think really go a long way. And especially if you can capitalize on your child's interests, because that's really big if they have a particular, thing that they're really excited about. Finally, one thing that's been really helpful for me, just in hearing other people's experiences and learning about how to advocate and what to ask for, are different groups. There's an Ontario Autism Coalition. They have a really great Facebook group with many, many members, and I've learned a lot and found out a lot of great information from the people who run that coalition. So I think that's another good one as well.
They're also on our website, under our resources page. We have a whole list of different organizations and Jean was asking, can we recommend any blogs or websites with information regarding this topic? So if you take a look on our website first under our parent resources section, see what's there. And you can always reach out to us. We are very easy to find. Our website is ruthrumac.com, and you can also email us at info@ruthrumac.com, and your information or your question will be funneled to the right person. So we're happy to have conversations with each of you if you wanted to have a further conversation at another time. And I would love right now, while I'm just talking a little bit more about what we do, if you could take a moment and just put into the chat, what are you taking away from tonight? What are the things that you have found interesting or helpful or valuable? Because of course we review everything that we present for the next time. So we want to make sure that we're presenting as much valuable information as possible, and we would love your feedback. Excellent. So here we go. A little bit more about us while you have a moment to type something in. Or I'll just give you a half a moment. I'm going to take a deep breath because we've been talking for a really long time. So we provide one-on-one support. Right now it's all virtual, and I have been amazed at the level of efficacy that we've been able to achieve in the virtual space. When we are in person, we are so hands-on. You know, you're going to see our younger kids bouncing down the halls on giant bouncy balls and playing, you know, doing scavenger hunts and games, all related to whatever need support they need. And we were concerned at first of making that only in the virtual space, but I have to say our team of educators are incredible. They are creative, they're innovative, and we've been able to do many interactive things with whiteboards and all sorts of other games and activities that we can share our screens and share games and apps that we've created for our students on their own. And it has really increased that engagement and continued to keep the fun. That's really the most important thing. We also do test support, so test preparation for an entrance into private schools or entrance into US universities. And again, we come at it with a very personalized approach. And then we do group classes, and that's something that you might want to access over the spring or over the summer, where we can work on written expression, math, keyboarding, executive functions, which is a really big one, and getting prepared for that next school year, considering the year that we have had. Well, Stacy, thank you. Stacy says, wonderful presentation. I love the clarity of how you explain the IPRC process and supports available to families. I work with so many families who come to me for support navigating the system. I feel for them. Every child needs an advocate. It's so true. And Michelle says, thank you for what you do and for answering our questions. The one thing I take from tonight, the acronyms from all the things. I found it tough as a parent to hear all of this in the beginning. It's great that there are people out there that can help explain and educate parents. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. You know, we love what we do. We've been doing it a long time, and every time we come up against a new situation, we kind of dive in with both feet, figure it out, and do as much research as we can, and you know, reflect and try again. And that's the growth mindset that we bring to our students as well. You know, if it's not working or you're not there yet, we're going to keep working on it until we figure it out and we figure out a way to make it right. Excellent. All right. Oh, what else? Lisa says that she's happy to join, and she's got a better understanding of the development of the IEP and the IPRC process. And her kids are much older, so current parent information, take back to the team, will be helpful. And she loved LD being a learning difference, not a learning disability. And that's something that that's the phrase we use in the office all the time. And Jean says, great presentation, really clear and useful. It's so hard to find accurate, pertinent information out there. And this presentation has been very clarifying. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate you sticking around and taking the time to listen to us. And I'm very serious about being there to answer phone calls or to send your questions to the right person on our team. So at any time, feel free to reach out. You can reach us at www.ruthrumac.com. You can reach us at info@ruthrumac.com, as well as follow us, I have to say, on Twitter, and where's that? There we go. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. We're all over the place. Just type in the name, you'll find it. And if anybody has any other questions, they can stick around. Other than that, thank you so much and have a wonderful, wonderful evening. Stay safe.